Joining us now on the program is Senator Jim Runestad, a state senator from Michigan's 23rd District. Senator Runestad, thanks for being with us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on the show, of course, as we are well underway into a new Congress here in the state of Michigan, as we are at the federal level, and plenty already has been in the works across both sides of the aisle in Lansing. So I just want to give you a moment here as we begin to talk about some of the things that you've been working on as of late in Lansing for our local area.
Well, the primary thing that I've been working on is trying to get some reform, and I guess we're going to be talking about this today, of CPS. And another thing that I've been working on, actually, since I got in office, is trying to get a fix for our problems with dyslexic students. Michigan is known to be the worst state in the nation for a dyslexic student. They get absolutely no help. Every other state does some kind of testing to find out which students are having problems with reading and then do early intervention. Michigan does not do that. And it's been a struggle for year after year after year. And hoping before I get out of office that we can get some movement on fixing this problem.
And what sort of resources are you looking to eventually get into legislation and get into law for Michigan to have in place for some of these students that may be struggling because of their dyslexia in the classroom, and help them get the help that they need in order to be at the same level they should be at amongst their peers in their classes?
Well, there's a number of things. In the last couple of years, I was able to get $1 million and then $2 million into training for teachers that were struggling with how to teach their dyslexic students. And so we had two different entities. There were Michigan organizations that did this kind of training, and it was going to be a pilot run. It was completely full. The teachers that went through it said it was spectacular. They were so impressed with the advance that they made personally and in their ability to help the students. Now, and believe me, that was just a drop in the bucket of the need. And now I don't even know if that's even going to get through in this year's budget. The bigger proposal that we had was, I think, 7 bill proposals to teach the teachers coming out of universities, how do you teach a dyslexic student? There is no work on that currently. And there's the Orton-Gillingham method is the best method. That's not being taught. Most of the teachers were never taught phonics today, and that's critical for a dyslexic student to be able to learn. This bill was defeated over the last 2 terms. I think it will be, unfortunately, defeated again. That means Michigan students will be the worst in the nation. Again, we're, I think, number 40 in the nation for 4th grade reading. We spend a fortune. We pour millions and millions more into the programs every year and don't get results. In fact, the results get worse. And every time I talk about this issue, it falls on deaf ears. So it's just very frustrating.
We're joined by Senator Jim Runestad, a Republican from White Lake, here on today's edition of the Megacast, representing the 23rd District in the Michigan Senate. And Senator Runestad, as we were talking about education and trying to help students that are struggling in the classroom, recently the Michigan Senate had voted to dismantle portions of the so-called 3rd grade reading law that would then, in this case, no longer require a student to be held back should they fall over a year behind their grade reading level. Give us your thoughts on this change to this law that was voted affirmatively by a 22-16 vote in the Senate last week.
Yeah, I was very conflicted when I voted for this initially, and the reason was we were hearing decade after decade that certain school districts, Detroit was the most prominent, were simply passing students on who are illiterate. They couldn't even read their own diplomas. And it would go on decade after decade. It was like, okay, well, there's not going to be any work to help these students. And I've talked to students who were in that situation and said, this is terrible. I can't even read, and now I'm expected to function in this society. So we thought there'd at least be some kind of work on behalf of these students from the school districts. The numbers still are not improving. The total number of students that would have been held back would be about 500 out of, I think, 128,000 students. So very, very small number. And I said, if we can put dyslexic training finally into the program, this is probably something I could support. But if you're not going to do anything for these students, there's no penalty for educational systems passing students on illiterate and giving them a diploma, then something has to be done. So again, if the people could see what happens in Lansing, we're the worst in the nation for dyslexia. They get no help. This has been known for years. We pour millions and millions of dollars into early reading, but with no dyslexic training. Up to 20% of the students are dyslexic. We have the 40th worst outcomes in the nation. You'd think that there'd be the will to get this fixed, and there's no will. So I put in an amendment that we start teaching the teachers coming out of universities about dyslexia. It was defeated. So it's just very, very frustrating.
Yeah, all these investments being made in the education system are great, but they need to be, of course, wide-ranging for the wide range of students that we have here in the state of Michigan. Senator Runestad, going back to another issue that unfortunately affects our children here in the state of Michigan. Recently, we had some really sad news here in our local area, a tragic situation in Lincoln Park that involved Child Protective Services and a dangerous situation that led to some people actually losing their life in the process. And you had raised your voice about some issues with transparency from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees Michigan's Child Protective Services. Tell us about your experience working with local constituents in this situation and how that shined light on some of the issues that you've now spoken out about with Child Protective Services.
Yeah, my interest in this started decades ago. My wife and I were foster care parents. We would hear these horrible stories of kids being abused and returned and abused and returned. I remember we were going through training for foster care, and one of the parents who was one of our trainers was saying that they had these very young girls who had been raped, and this foster care parent had them for a while. They went back to get raped again. She got them again. They went back to get raped again. She went. I was like, "What? This is insane!" I remember pounding my hand on the table. I had to leave the room. I was so upset. I was saying, "You mean they are raped and returned?" Yep. So I tried finding out information on what was happening with Child Protective Services for years, and always the same answer: we can't tell you anything. So I was not surprised when I was reading about 2.5 weeks ago about a mother with mental health issues, probably schizophrenia, who had 3 children, a 12, an 8, and a 5-year-old, and they were wandering the streets of Pontiac in the freezing cold, and the kids just had some sheets wrapped around them. And she thought that everyone was trying to kill them, and like I said, severe mental health issues. And she bedded the kids down in a field, and then she and 2 of the kids froze to death, and the older daughter ran to a home and survived. And so I wanted to know what interactions were there with CPS. So I called them, and they said, "Well, we can't tell you anything." And I said, "That's what I've been hearing for 30 years. You can't tell anything." "Well, how are I'm a sitting senator. You can't tell me anything?" "No." So I started getting concerned that these cases never seem to end. We got a new one cropping up every week or two. And I had them send me why they say they can't disclose this information. They said it was state and federal law. Well, the federal law is very lax. It just says you can't give personal identifying information like the home address, that kind of thing. The state law is more constrictive, and the only part of the legislature or media that can get any information is a committee that oversees the department. But the problem with that is Okay, the department head is appointed by the governor, and the governor obviously doesn't want to splash a bunch of negative news around. So a committee chair who's also part of the same party as the governor, are they going to want to have a hearing and disclose all the bad news, make embarrassing their governor? No, they're not. So that was not going to happen. So I put in a bill that said any sitting legislator or credentialed media can get this information, can sit down with the file and find out what happened. But they have to also sign the same non-disclosure form, which is a 93-day in prison and jail misdemeanor if they disclose the information. So the same protections are in place, but at least we can get an understanding of where the failures are within the system. So that went to committee. I talked to the committee chair, and the committee chair said they're not going to have a hearing. And I said, why not? And they said, well, probably wouldn't be good for the media to have this information. I said, well, it's a misdemeanor if they disclose, but I'd be open if you want just the legislators to have this opportunity. No, no hearing. So we're back to square one. We're just like with the dyslexia, we're back again with this issue of CPS to be crash and burn for decades longer. No transparency, no disclosure. What went wrong? They just point to a aggregated data that's in the auditing report. Well, that's just the sheer total numbers. It doesn't tell you where the failures were. So it's not going to have a hearing. Very, very discouraging. I think if the average citizen in the state of Michigan peel the onion on this stuff, they go, "What in the hell's going on?" We're the worst one of the worst in the nation on dyslexia. Well, actually, everyone says the worst, and we can't get any resources, anything to fix this. Nope. We have this terrible. DHHS has been under court order for its child welfare since 2008. I believe it's the longest running federal case against a state about how we're doing with this child welfare. You'd think that there'd be the will to fix it. Nope, no hearing, no transparency, nothing. So it just seems these systemic issues for these children never, ever get fixed.
Yeah, and it was WDIV-TV in Detroit that had made a Freedom of Information Act request to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services over the CPS case regarding Monica Kennedy and her two sons, who were the individuals who were found dead frozen to death in a field in Pontiac in mid to late January, and they were told that in the case the information was not available as there was an exemption, and then Governor Whitmer was even asked about this by a local news organization and said that she, quote, didn't know that they were exempt from FOIA, and perhaps there's opportunity for us to take a real hard look at it and see what more we can do. I know that you mentioned at the committee level, it's kind of been dragging their feet or a straight denial on any sort of changes to this. Has there been any discussion with the governor's office or with her team about interventions from the executive office?
The chair of the committee that was assigned to, and she is the most involved governor in the legislature I've ever seen. I personally believe, from everything we can see, she seems to be running the entire legislature in the House and Senate. For her, with all the publicity associated with this, that this bill was going to go to the committee, she could absolutely have talked to the committee chair and said, "You're running the bill," and the bill would have run. I believe it was the opposite. I bet her people said, "You're not running this bill. There's going to be no transparency because I've got a lot of political ambitions that are going to be really put to the test if we rip open this can of worms and the people in the state of Michigan find out that we're doing nothing to protect these kids." And so it's back to square one. Everything's always back to square one. Again, the people, if they could see what happens so much in Lansing, they'd be grabbing their pitchforks and torches and be heading to Lansing with a fury, because things that should be absolutely at least have a hearing. Let's find out what's happening. No hearing.
Joined on today's program by Senator Jim Runestad from Michigan's 23rd Senatorial District out of White Lake. Senator Runestad, a couple more minutes with you before we'll have to say goodbye today. Anything else that you'd like to discuss, or anything else that you are working on that your constituents here in our local area should be keeping an eye out for in the near future?
The courts, I think, are an area that the people of the state of Michigan really have to pay attention to. And again, just like with the other issues, there's transparency issues with the court system. So there are counties in Michigan where you could go before the court and you have your proceeding, and then the system says, well, you can't have a copy of the proceeding. And they say, well, what do you mean I can't have a copy? No, we'll give you a transcript. Well, I've talked to attorneys who have said that they personally observed judges leaning over to the court reporter and saying, don't put that in. So if you don't have a video in there, you're not going to know if stuff is left out of that transcript. Also, the way you say something on a, personally say something versus what's in writing can be completely different. So I have been trying for years and years and years to say that every county that videotapes, and they all do now, have to, at a decent cost, give the constituent, the person who was in the courtroom, a copy. And Oakland County is one of the worst. They don't give any videos. And when asked why, they said, well, we don't want to look bad on social media. Well, the Supreme Court of Michigan, they are taped, and you can get a copy of that tape. Every little local to the top legislature, all are videotaped, and you can see every proceeding. Why would one county or a couple of counties say, well, we don't want to look bad? I mean, it's public transparency. I'm concerned that they're concerned about looking bad. That's even more of a concern, that we need to get this bill passed to get transparency for the people here in the state of Michigan. Again, it probably will never happen.
Transparency, a major issue for those all across the political spectrum here in Michigan and around the United States. Senator Runestad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.